Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Thought Loop podcast sidebar with me, Sabrina, and I have my main guy, JL, also known as Jamal, right here with me. We want to discuss the update regarding the Menendez brothers and their case. But before we jump into our commentary, I want to take a short while to just go over the general particulars surrounding the case and provide some background for those who are not quite familiar with the case and what is happening as of lately.
Let's go.
So, brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez were convicted of the first degree murders of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, in their Beverly Hills home in 1989. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 1996. The Menendez brothers have been seeking resentencing, arguing that new evidence suggests they suffered abuse at the hands of their father, Jose. They claim they acted in self-defense, fearing for their lives and seeking to prevent further abuse. Well, the resentencing hearing, originally scheduled for late January, was postponed due to devastating wildfires in the Los Angeles area. These fires impacted preparations for the hearing, leading to the rescheduling. Former Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon supported resentencing the Menendez brothers, citing new evidence of possible abuse as a reason for a new trial. He initiated a petition arguing that the brothers had been rehabilitated. The current Los Angeles County District Attorney, Nathan Hochman, does not support overturning the Menendez brothers' murder convictions or granting them a new trial. He has stated that the new evidence presented, including a letter allegedly written by Eric Menendez, doesn't meet the standard required for a new trial, questioning its credibility and timeliness.
What potential outcomes could result from the resentencing process?
Good question, JL. So, if a judge were to agree to re-sentence the brothers, they could potentially become eligible for parole. The parole board would then schedule hearings, and if they agree the brothers should be freed, the case would go to the governor of California, who has the final say.
So, how has the family reacted on Hochman's decision for not wanting to support the retrial?
Well, the Menendez family has expressed disappointment with DA Hochman's decision, stating that it disregards the trauma the brothers experience and silences abuse survivors everywhere. They also claim that Hochman broke his promise to remove politics from the process and that he has not followed the law.
Have the brothers discussed what they would do if they were released? Any future plans?
Hmm. Apparently, Lyle Menendez has mentioned pursuing a master's degree and working on reintegrating formerly incarcerated people back into society. He's also expressed interest in transforming prison environments and advocating for survivors of childhood sex abuse, with potential involvement in creating a foundation with Rosie O'Donnell.
Wow, all right.
So, with all of that being said, let's discuss our thoughts. JL, let's take a quick break and we'll jump right into it.
What's up, everybody? JL here with the lovely Miss Sabrina. We are with the Thought Loop, but right on the side, we discuss everything inside and out and in between. Make sure to check out the rest of the team on the Thought Loop podcast. You know, it's wild. The Menendez case, man, it really started as this poster child of tabloid sensationalism, right? I mean, headlines flashing about Beverly Hills mansions, extravagant spending, and shotgun murders. But now, years later, it's like the conversation has shifted into something heavier, more introspective. There's a growing focus on, unpacking trauma, abuse, and whether the system can or even should see beyond the crimes themselves.
Yeah, and the abuse conversation feels particularly loud now compared to the 90s. Back then, the whole child abuse narrative wasn't given like any space to breathe, you know? It was more like greedy sons kill their parents, case closed. But lately, it seems we're being asked to reconcile this kind of systemic neglect of male vulnerability. It's like, why are we so quick as a society to dismiss men when they talk about abuse?
Right. That's a massive blind spot. And honestly, probably why their attorney back then struggled to get the jury to see past those standard stereotypes of masculinity. Vulnerability in men just wasn't a thing people wanted or even knew how to process at the time. By the second trial, when allegations of abuse came up, the narrative people were comfortable with had already hardened. It's greed, not trauma. Period.
And that lack of empathy, ugh, it shows up everywhere. Look at DA Hochman's recent decision to dismiss their petition for a new trial. The family's response was just heartbreaking. One of their quotes stood out to me: abuse doesn't exist in a vacuum. I mean, yes, it leaves scars that you can't see, but that doesn't make anything they endured less real.
True. But also, just playing devil's advocate for a second here, doesn't Hochman have a point about this, though? Like, if the letter isn't credible and it wasn't timely submitted, the legal system's hands might be tied in some ways. He brought up issues with everything from authenticity to admissibility, and courts need more than, sympathy to overturn verdicts.
Right? But can we also talk about how the system creates those obstacles to begin with? Like, trauma survivors don't always have the means or even the ability to comply with every legal technicality, especially in the aftermath of something so destructive. Add in the stigma around male survivors, and it becomes, uh, this endless uphill battle.
Yeah, no doubt. The prosecution called the letter basically irrelevant because, one, it wasn't brought up in time, and two, the Menendez brothers apparently waited too long to file this current motion. But if you're Eric or Lyle, struggling with trauma that's been buried for decades, how do you even piece together the courage to say something within like these arbitrary windows of time?
Exactly. And honestly, it's not just about timing, it's about credibility. Even today, people still grapple with whether we believe survivors at all, let alone under these legal constraints. I think DA Hochman's stance, whether you agree with it or not, touches on this much, much bigger issue. How our justice system deals with stories rooted in trauma, or rather how it doesn't.
Which brings us to that broader public reaction. The family statement went hard against Hochman, saying his comments had set survivors back. And hey, that's a powerful sentiment. But do statements like that actually, shift the perspective of legal institutions? Because at some point, these cases aren't just about the Menendez brothers. They're also about redefining what justice like even looks like when you mix trauma and accountability.
Yeah, and the fact that the family could even say he's not just dismissing them, he's silencing survivors everywhere. That makes me wonder how many voices like theirs have already been lost in the system. And with so many voices like theirs already lost in the system, it makes you wonder, what about Jose Menendez and those allegations? If everything Eric claimed about the abuse is true, doesn't it feel like we're staring at a deeply entrenched cycle of trauma, one that ultimately erupted into something unthinkable? Into
Yeah, and it's clear how that kind of trauma, if left unchecked, can lead people to act in ways that society isn't ready to understand. But what's wild is how families like the Menendez family can mirror bigger breakdowns in society itself, like on a systemic level. We neglect abuse survivors all the time, and then we wonder why situations spiral out of control.
exactly. And it's not just neglect, it's how the system almost punishes survivors for speaking up. I mean, look at Eric and Lyle. Society only saw the privilege, the money, the headlines, but no one wanted to peel back the layers. Like, why weren't we asking harder questions about their upbringing back then?
Right. And when you think about Lyle now talking about advocating for abuse survivors, it's bittersweet, isn't it? Like, it shows he might have grown into someone willing to use his platform for good.
But it also makes me wonder if people will even buy into that, Like, how do we reconcile someone trying to redeem themselves when their past is, well, murder?
I hear you. And it's this huge ethical question, right? Do we separate who they've become from what they've done? Or is the trauma they experience so central that you can't talk about their actions without addressing it?
Exactly. And let's not forget, so much of this stuff came out after their sentencing. If their lawyer had been able to introduce this narrative back then, it could have totally shifted how the public and the court saw them.
But even if it had, would people have really listened? I mean, there's that deep cultural resistance to looking at abuse in male survivors, period. And I feel like that resistance shapes everything, how we understand justice, how we even define it.
Yeah, and that's the heartbreaking part. It almost feels like the system isn't built for nuance, just black and white judgments with no room for stories like theirs.
It's exactly what we were saying, how the system isn't built for nuance. D.A. Hochman's rejection of clemency for the Menendez brothers feels like another example of that, right? Like, he's making this bold statement that the legal system can't waver just because public sentiment is starting to see things differently over time.
But then isn't that kind of the point? I mean, when Gascon was DA, he openly embraced those shifts, right? He pushed for clemency, saying the system had room to evolve. Hochman feels like a step backwards, a refusal to let morality shape the law, even when society is screaming that change is necessary.
Right? But I think what Hochman is banking on is, well, this idea that legal frameworks can't depend on shifting emotions or even truths that feel, subjective. He's weighing the evidence with strict criteria. It's like his role isn't to rewrite the system's rules, it's to enforce them.
True, but can we really call it justice if the framework ignores moral growth? Gascon started that conversation about clemency as a tool for acknowledging rehabilitation and systemic failure. Hochman's rejection feels cold, but maybe that's the way the system shields itself from accountability.
Yeah, and you've got a point. The fact that Hochman cited technicalities like timeliness and admissibility, it's like, man, these are survivor stories, not just legal loopholes. But Hochman stuck to that black and white playbook, facts over feelings.
Exactly, and I can't help but feel the timing is a little ironic. The family's petition hits just as wildfires are wreaking havoc across LA. It's like we're talking about a community fighting for recognition under one kind of crisis while another one burns, literally.
Yeah, those overlapping struggles really tell a bigger story, huh? A story where systems of justice, even in times of disaster, keep folks fighting just to be heard. And those delays, man, they keep survivors stuck on hold as if their truth has an expiration date.
But what kind of justice lets technicalities trump humanity? Every time the Menendez brothers case gets delayed, it feels like a missed chance to confront those deeper questions. Who do we really see as victims? And, at what cost?
And maybe that's the heart of it. The Menendez brothers aren't just two guys petitioning for clemency. They're like symbols of everything the system struggles to reconcile. Trauma, crime, redemption, it all crashes together, and the system just doesn't have the tools to handle that kind of moral complexity.
Yeah, and maybe that's why this case still resonates decades later. It forces us to ask the hardest question. If the system isn't evolving with us, is it really serving us at all?
And that, my friend, is where we leave it for now. Heavy stuff, but hey, these are the conversations that matter.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll catch you all next time. Thanks for diving deep with us.